Hello and welcome to the dungeons. Dayman here. Today we're going into our next sequence of our Zero to Hero. And this is going to talk all about our weapon perks and how to use them. Now, the weapon might not make the hero, but sure does help, as we all know the story of the meek protagonist who gains the legendary weapon that helps him defeat the darkness. So, let's get into it. I'm going to come into first person, and we're going to look at our fabricator, because this has a hidden feature that you might not have found yet. When we look at this fabricator, we know that we can make our potions, our gear, but look at this window. Our perk info will tell you everything you need to know, somewhat cryptically, about your weapons. So there are features that are available to all weapons in these first two windows. However, as we move forward, it'll demonstrate the available perks to all of your weapon types. So, if a weapon perk is redundant, I won't re-explain it, but rather indicate whether or not it's worth putting on a weapon and why. So, first things first, attack power. This is one of those perks you put on a weapon before you get anything better on it, as it is available on all weapon types. Now, that 5 to 35% will be randomized, but you'll get a higher percentage based off the weapon tier. So legendary weapons will likely have a higher percentage chance to activate that, or to have a higher percentage damage. Once you fabricate your weapon, it will be locked in. And if you are curious as how to calculate that, check out my EXO and weapon perk video. However, if you are interested in seeing that damage for yourself, I recommend grabbing a weapon of the same damage type, and then taking it without any additional features on it, so that you can, and then load up a doomer in the sandbox and check that little percentage of its health going down, with somewhat indicating the amount of damage increase. Now, criticals. If you've been on my channel for a while, you know that criticals are the most important weapon perk, in my opinion. That is the easiest way to get the most damage out of your weapons. It may not be the most consistent, but it is the highest percentage damage available amongst any of our weapons. All right, creature damage. Now, creature damage is somewhat of a filler pick if you don't yet have something more viable on your weapons, as they are available on all your weapons. I prefer something consistent. So undead damage. Now, the 5 to 35% is the same as we previously discussed as locking your percentage. Undead damage is available in every biome. No matter your biome, you're going to find undead enemies. So when we're talking about consistency, it's quite good. Monster damage is fairly good for increasing the damage dealt to most monster-type bosses, as most bosses are in fact monsters. Critter damage is a no-go. Critters have the lowest HP total of any of the creature types, even being able to be defeated in a single blow most often. Sorcerer damage. There are only two sorcerers in the game, being the mage and uber mage. Therefore, it is not going to affect many monster types at all. Elemental damage. Now, this again is a consistency pick. If you have elemental weapons, having an elemental type damage will allow you to deal increased damage to an elemental creature of the same type as you, such as ice. Elite damage. This starts at the glowing red enemies. If you're curious what an elite enemy looks like, go into the sandbox and load up an elite enemy of each type to see what they actually look like. So you're not going and wildly hoping to hit elites. We're getting into our more specific damage types, working into our axes. First things first, explosions is going to be one of the best options for increasing the damage yield. This is only available on axes and spears. So being that it is somewhat unique makes it a standout. However, I find that the explosions are triggered more often when thrown as opposed to in melee. So that throw distance. Throw distance is a niche pick and is really there to help fill out a kit. Whether you have a side sword and greatsword and need just a little bit more range, throw distance might be an option you might pick. Though I think it's outclassed by the throw damage, as throw damage is going to stack with your might perk, which increases thrown damage. So any of your throw damage perks are a great pick, especially on axes, as they get their most utility when thrown. Here we have our shot, distance, and slowing for our bow. Now, the bow is a difficult weapon to learn, but once you get it down, it can be one of the best weapons in your kit. Now, with shot distance, this decreases the drop-off as its primary feature. Now, shooting far, you're going to be able to shoot as far as you need to with the bow. However, shot distance, by decreasing the drop-off, makes it a little more accurate, but I recommend learning how to use a bow without that perk so that you can potentially get attack power or criticals on your slowing bow. Now, slowing is a relatively rare perk, as it's not available on many types. And by being able to slow down your enemies, this will even affect boss-type enemies, making it an excellent pick on any weapon that it has available on it. I recommend ice and slowing, or slowing and poison for your bow, as both of those are going to be great options to keep enemies at range. When we work into our crossbow, the slowing perk is another great pick. We've discussed that, but the reload is the needed perk. All crossbows, I would recommend, have the reload feature. If it doesn't have the reload feature, the amount of damage you're gaining off of those options really don't outpace the damage per second available to those extra shots. Now, the difference between a 6-shot and 8-shot crossbow is really not present. If you have a better elemental typing on your 6-shot crossbow, I recommend that as opposed to just going to an 8-shot just because it's an 8-shot. When we're talking about your crossbow, however, the best elements you can get on it are going to be your ice, as a turn that shot into a kill shot with that follow-up shot. Poison is decent, but fire is an amazing one. If you can get fire element, criticals, and reload, that's going to be quite an impressive crossbow. When we're looking at our dagger, now the dagger, it was slept on at first by me personally. I did not realize how great a dagger was. It is the fastest throw and recall in the game. There are weapons that might be able to recall as fast or throw as fast, but this does both. Throw distance is something that has a bit more of a chance to be present on a dagger in a useful way, as you're most often throwing the dagger, whereas an axe is decent in melee. Now, Vampire. Vampire is available on all bladed weapons, and as you can tell, it's one that I'm running as well, as Vampire helps me be able to keep myself in a fight, and I can actually throw this as a way of healing myself. Quite useful. Poison. Now, this is not the elemental poison. This is a weapon perk poison, meaning you can get poison both as an element and as a weapon perk. And that poison can also be paired with an additional element, such as fire or ice, and poison, as previously mentioned. I think double poison daggers are an incredibly powerful choice, as each percentage chance is going to be checked separately, allowing that poison property to be triggered more often. Quite a phenomenal pick. For your hammers. Now, these hammers have area damage, which are very similar to the explosion damage, but is triggered through melee attacks. Throw distance on the hammer is not going to be the most viable pick, but it can come in handy, as previously mentioned, as slowing. This is the only melee weapon with slowing. And when paired with a poison element, it is one of the best distance managing tools in the game. That, with slowing area damage and poison, you will decide the pace of every fight. Longsword. Now, this is the greatsword that sits on your back. There are two picks on here that many people will say are the perks that you absolutely need, being knockback distance and unblockable. However, I will say knockback distance is just there for fun. You want to be able to have follow-up attacks and be able to place your enemies with that knockback distance, not just send them across the map or get in the way of your allies. It's fun, but it isn't the most strategic option. Vampire, again, if you are wielding that greatsword in two hands, you can swing it far faster and be able to increase the health yield available to you. Now, unblockable. Unblockable will pair perfectly with any of these other perks, allowing you to more frequently trigger those hits and thus trigger your perks. So this is the one that I recommend you seek on all of your greatswords or longswords. Stab damage. This does not simply read as thrust attacks. Whether you're throwing a weapon, whether you are striking with a weapon along its edge or the tip, that 50% damage increase will be on at all times. So stab damage outpaces the percentage chance of the attack damage or attack power, right? As at maximum is only 35, where this is a guaranteed 50% damage increase. So stab damage for your mythical greatswords, if you have the chance to pick it, that's what you're looking for. Now the shield, it only has 2 perks, and the only 2 perks worth having. Now, knockback distance is, again, there for fun. I have a bit of a throw pick, but see, this is really what makes a shield. What really makes a shield are the elemental typings, which are randomized and not visible on the fabrication screen. A poison type shield will stagger enemies. An ice type shield will allow you to follow up with a killing blow, and a fire type shield will allow you to bash enemies back with a greater radius. So knockback distance is one that I don't necessarily see as the most strategic pick, similar to the greatsword, as sometimes I want to be able to knock an enemy into a pit as opposed to knock them to the other side of that pit. So keep that in mind. Absorb. This is amazing. There's a chance for whenever you're holding the shield specifically, and it takes it and hits land against it, for you to regain health. Mind you that even though a shield can block your back while it's on your back, only the perks will be triggered while it is being held. Throw distance. Throw distance for your spear is one of those times where the kind of finicky nature of a spear, this is slightly more viable on a spear than I would say any other thrown weapon. Throw damage, however, is phenomenal on the spear, as it can really unlock its potential at the throne, especially the mythical spear. But explosions. If you are going to pick any or find a weapon of any variety for the spear, weapon perk that is, you want explosions. This is my criticals and explosions spear, and once I got it, I didn't use anything else, because boy oh boy, throwing this thing around does tremendous damage. For your side sword, once again, vampire. The side sword is a very fast weapon, and therefore is able to trigger that vampire very greatly. Throwable, you're going to be better off with another weapon that you can throw. But again, stab damage. You want stab damage and vampire, because boy oh boy, getting more of that health recovery is huge. Now again, it's based off your player health, not the damage dealt by the weapon. So let's go and look at what these weapons look like and how to best utilize them. I'll try to keep each segment relatively brief. I will first put us into a first-person view. Or sorry, a selfie view. Looks so scary. Sorry for dropping you there. So, when we're looking at our weapons, you want to be holding them at your front and at your side. The reason you do so is it's an adequate guard and allows you to follow up with great strikes. I can keep my enemies at bay, whether they're at my side or my front. The next reason why is because this is the start of the sequence of Heaven 2, which is the more advanced Heaven 6. What you do is you bring one hand high, one hand beneath the elbow, and as you extend one hand, you're going to strike under with the next, passing them parallel so that this hand is now by the ear and this hand is moving forward. Once this hand is forward, it's going to tuck by the ear. So from ear to ear, from armpit to ear, okay? And then this forward hand is going to re-tuck under that armpit. So ear, forward, ear. Armpit, forward, ear. Forward, armpit, forward. Forward, ear, forward. Passing parallel to reset that sequence. Now that could be a little tricky to get at first, but by doing so, it's going to allow those sequences. Now I run that dagger and spear combo because there's far less contact than you would with two swords. So that covers very briefly the sequencing with your strikes and how to keep a very adequate guard with your weapons. Now when we're looking at what that looks like in our combat, I'll throw this into third person for some fights. Here you go. I have my weapons guarding me at all positions, can't move in. I can always follow up with my strikes. Now, when it comes to the dagger, you want to be able to quickly release and get used to that returning sequence. It has a tendency to stab into enemies, making it a little difficult to get that adequate return. However, you want to be used to throwing and returning quickly. Be careful not to be using that monkey grip where your hands are gripping constantly, as that can cause that weapon to return before you are ready for it to. The dagger gets its most utility when you are at far range, hence that throw distance, but can be somewhat distant, great for a follow-up strike with a knockback attack. Those are pretty light throws as they weren't auto-targeting properly. Now, here's where the real tips come into play with our spear. I'm going to take off the shield just to demonstrate how best to utilize that spear. I don't want to block your vision is why. The spear is a great thrown weapon, but people have a very difficult time utilizing it properly because we have this idea of putting our offhand on the front. Instead, grab that offhand at the bottom so that your primary hand can allow you, just like the Greatsword, to wield this thing very quickly and agilely. And doing so, striking low along your opponent's feet, right? Making these figure eights towards the feet are what's going to help you get a lot better speed. And when you use it in one hand, it has a tendency to get stuck and get disarmed. But when you're using it in two hands, that ability for it to get disadvantage of getting it disarmed is far less likely, right? And very quickly, I'm going to show that you can do some pretty cool weapon switchings. So if you want to do more of a javelin style throw rather quickly, what you're going to do is enter into your pause menu. You're going to, first person mode. From your pause menu, you are going to go into your other menu and then go to weapon switching and turn on your double trigger. Double trigger so that you have to press it twice so as it doesn't happen on accident. The next feature is going to controls and turn on auto run. That is 100% necessary to get the most out of this game. All right, moving forward here. When you're working on your spear, you are going to do an overhead throw and point directly at the enemy. Don't release high, don't release low. Okay? Always point at the point of release. The other thing is, if you are holding it forward, especially with a shield, you can do a very quick thrust to release, but you have to put oomph, you have to force it forward in order to get that power, as a light throw will simply glance off an opponent. So really force that hand forward upon that release, and you can return it rather quickly. The spear with the Juggernaut perk is a phenomenal pick. Moving into our other weapons here. Your bows and crossbows are, let's see. Where's my pretty bow? Here's my pretty ice and slowing bow. It's my favorite, in fact. Pretty. So, let's put us back into... Actually, first person mode will be ideal for demonstrating how to aim with the bow. The bow. You aim with the arrow, not the bow. See how I can direct which direction I'm at? The glowing arrow will indicate which elements I'm on. I'm always pulling to the center of my chest so I can look straight down the arrow as opposed to trying to compensate for that off angle. This might feel more natural, but by holding it directly in front of me, kind of pulling it to center chest or right under the chin, I have a much easier chance lining up those shots, even on off angles. Now, if you need to, you can kind of skew that arrow a little bit to take an off-angle shot if you really need to, but at that point I would just recommend turning the body to take that shot. So you can also release an arrow and then right from the release be able to grab that arrow. So the moment I release, I'm grabbing an arrow from my back. Let's look at the crossbow. Now, this is one of my favorite crossbows as it's multi-shot, criticals, and ice. Boy, oh boy, is this thing's a doozy. Now, one thing you're not going to do is you're not going to trust those sights. I'll put this in the first person. You can see just how unreliable those sights are. If I look straight down the barrel, I'm shooting high, not where those are. So instead of shooting from the hip makes it much easier to reload, but I like to shoot directly from my midline. By shooting directly from my midline, I have a very intuitive sense of where my shots are going, even on those off angles. Now, another thing of note is that glowing bolt will always tell you what elements you are, but see how even if I was running, I think it's Impale, basically the ranged version of critical hits, just because the bolt isn't glowing does not mean that you're not going to deal a critical hit on contact, because on contact, the exosuit will check. So if you have a non-critical hit bow and you have the critical hit ranged option, your arrows will not glow. So just because it's not glowing does not mean you're not getting criticals. With that, we've covered almost all of our weapon tips with the exception of the axe and shield. When it comes to the axe, remember, this weapon has a tendency to get stuck in enemies, especially things like doomers and fleshy type targets. So fleshy type targets will cause that weapon to bind up, making it relatively difficult to get a proper strike into your target. Any thrown weapons, you're going to want to be at your dominant hand. Put us back into third person. So, briefly, our Greatsword. Always using two hands, always. So, when you are striking, think about stirring a pot, right, with that hand, almost in a figure 8 motion. Or pushing that primary hand forward for damage, right? The most important thing is we are here to aid our allies, not be a hindrance to them. If you are working with ranged allies, do not be knocking back your enemies willy-nilly, disrupting their targeting. If you have ranged allies, help them out by striking an enemy straight down. By striking an enemy straight down, they'll fall to the floor and give them, your allies, time to unload shots on them while they stand up. The other thing is, if you don't yet have an unblockable greatsword, guess what? Yes, you do. I call this the south-north strike. By going straight up from an opponent's feet, where almost all enemies have a very open hitbox at their feet. Now, it can be a little difficult to line up that shot, but practice that south-north, and you will be able... Wow, he flew all the way up there. You will be able to send enemies flying without them being able to stop your attacks. The next thing is keep that guard up when you're moving in, right? And you can always guard and push, and do that stirring figure 8. For your axe, okay, that straight up and down throw is going to be far more adequate for striking the head. However, if you have to overcome clearance, I recommend tucking this by the shoulder and then releasing. Tucking by the shoulder and releasing so as to prevent collision. Where here, sometimes it can strike against a higher target. With those things in mind, remember that when you are striking into fleshy targets, and you're sequencing your shots, remember to get used to passing your weapons parallel, not crossing. So keep that parallel striking if you want to be using these more fast sequences. But remember, this axe will get stuck in targets if they're fleshy, reducing the time that you have to be dealing damage. With all of these tips, you're ready to jump into a dungeon. Now, keep in mind, we will be discussing the best tips on how to stay alive in the dungeon up next, so stay tuned to Zero to Hero. Until next time, remember to disinfect your face mask and wash your face. Dayman out. Peace.